Today, we're going to dig into the past to uncover something truly amazing, the agricultural strategies of the ancient Tamils during the Sangam period. And let me tell you, this wasn't just about putting seeds in the ground. No, this was a full-on masterclass in engineering and planning.
So it really makes you wonder, right? How did a civilization, thousands of years ago, with none of our modern tech, get so good at mastering its food supply? I mean, they only had the tools of the earth. Well, let's find out. We're going to follow the entire journey of a crop, right from the very beginning, getting the land ready, all the way to pulling it out of the ground at the final harvest. We'll look at all the incredible tools and techniques they had for every single stage.
Okay, first up, the art of land prep. You know, any great farmer, or heck, any great engineer, will tell you that the real work starts long before you even think about planting a seed. It is all about building that perfect foundation. And what's so fascinating is their strategy. The ancient Tamils didn't just go out and randomly dig up the soil. No, they had a crystal clear three-part mission. Get air into the soil, make the land perfectly level, and make sure it could hold on to as much water as possible. This was a very deliberate, step-by-step process.
The very first tool they'd bring out was the plow, known as the kalapai. Pulled by cattle, its main job was to break up all that hard, compacted earth. Now, this wasn't just about loosening dirt, it was about getting air down into the soil, which is absolutely critical if you want your seeds to sprout and grow.
Of course, after all that plowing, the field's going to be pretty uneven. So, what's next? They used the parambu, a super simple but brilliant wooden plank to level the entire surface. Why? This made sure water spread out evenly, giving every single plant a fair shot at survival.
And then, for the finishing touch, came the thalambu. This tool's whole purpose was to smash any big old clumps of earth that were left, creating this fine, perfect soil texture. It was a genius final step that made the soil a perfect sponge for water. And just like that, the land was ready. All right, the foundation is perfectly set. Time for phase 2, from seed to sapling. This is where we really get to see how all that meticulous prep work pays off, and they combine it with some serious precision and care. You know, they had a whole system worked out. First, they didn't just throw any old seeds in the ground. They'd hand-pick the best ones, dry them out, and make sure pests couldn't get to them. Then, they'd grow these little seedlings in a nursery first and only plant them in the fields in the cool morning air to avoid stressing them out. And get this, it was the women who handled the super delicate jobs of planting and weeding by hand, making sure those little saplings had zero competition. And here's something that just blows my mind. It feels so modern. They were all about organic farming. They totally understood how important soil health was, so they used natural fertilizers, things like green manure and cattle dung, to keep the land rich and fertile, year after year. That's sustainable agriculture, thousands of years ago. Okay, let's talk about one of the biggest challenges for any farmer, anywhere, anytime: water. You can have the best soil in the world, but without water, you've got nothing. And this wasn't just about finding water, it was about mastering it with some truly brilliant engineering. The Sangam Tamils basically saw two kinds of water. First, you had surface water, which, comes from ponds and lakes, the easy stuff to get to. But then you had what they called secretion water. What a cool name, right? That was their term for the hidden, underground water you had to pull up from wells. And they had specific tools for each one.
Now, for the shallow water, they had these techniques they called booming. On the left, you see box booming. It's basically a two-person basket they use to scoop up water. Pretty straightforward. But on the right, you've got man booming, a pretty slick lever system that let just one person lift water from a little bit deeper. It was all about having the right tool for the right depth.
But what about the really deep wells? For that, they had to bring in the big guns, the irrigation. This was their heavy-duty solution. They used the raw power of cattle, attached to a rope and wheel system, to haul a huge container of water up from way down deep. It's a perfect example of how they scaled their technology to fit the problem, using animal power to do the heavy lifting.
So the crops are planted, they're getting water, and they're growing nice and strong. Awesome. But now comes a whole new problem. How do you protect them? And the Sangam people didn't just, stick a scarecrow out there. They had a multi-layered defense strategy.
It was a really comprehensive system. I mean, sure, they had fences for a basic barrier, but to get rid of birds, young women would use instruments to make loud noises. For bigger, scarier animals, we're talking elephants here, they'd use flares and blowers. And if something needed a more forceful suggestion to leave, they had a projectile weapon ready to go.
And that brings us to one of their coolest defense tools, the catapult, or kven. This thing wasn't just about making noise. This was a way to physically push back against birds and other pests from a safe distance. It was all about actively protecting the crops and the farmers.
And here we are. We've reached the grand finale of this whole incredible process, the final harvest. This is it. This is the moment where all that strategy, all that hard work, and all that amazing ingenuity finally pays off.
So, once the crops were perfectly ripe, the go-to tool for the job was the sickle. Its curved blade was just perfectly designed for slicing through ripe paddy and corn with total efficiency. It let them bring in the harvest quickly and effectively.
But the work wasn't done yet. After harvesting, the crops were threshed right there in the field to get the grain out, and then stored in sacks. But check out that last step. They would immediately plow the soil again before it had a chance to dry out. They were already prepping the land for the next crop. That is some next-level thinking about crop rotation and continuous farming.
When you look at the whole picture, from the careful soil prep and water engineering to sustainable fertilization and layered defenses, you realize the farmers of the Sangam period weren't just workers. They were brilliant strategists. And it really leaves you with a big question. In our high-tech world, what wisdom from these ancient fields can we still learn from and maybe even cultivate today?